The handcuffs clicked before she could finish her sentence. Captain Douglas Hale pressed Simone Adeyemi's wrists together in front of 260 people, the cream of Carver City's civic society. In black tie, champagne in hand, standing in the grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel, and announced loud enough that the string quartet stopped playing that she was being detained for suspicion of theft. A diamond bracelet had gone missing from a guest's wrist. Simone was the nearest black employee. That was the entirety of his reasoning. She stood absolutely still, back straight, chin level, wearing the hotel's white catering uniform, and said nothing. She had learned early that silence was the most expensive thing she could offer in a moment like this, and she gave it fully. Not because she had nothing to say, because she had more to say than this room was ready to hear, and she knew, with the precision of someone 8 months from a bar exam and a lifetime from a father who had taught her that the law was a tool, and that the person who knew how to hold it was never at its mercy, exactly where and how she was going to say it. The ballroom held its breath. Captain Hale had no idea that the man he had called 40 minutes ago, the one who'd said he'd be there shortly, was already in the elevator. The doors opened at 8:47 p.m., and the room, which had been holding its breath, forgot to exhale. 6 hours earlier, this is where it begins. The morning Simone Adeyemi first started working events at the Harrington Hotel. She was 24 years old and finishing the last 18 credits of her law degree at night. One semester out from the bar exam she had been preparing for since she was 17 years old in her father's study, watching him read case files the way other fathers watched football. She had taken the catering job for 2 reasons: the flexible scheduling fit around her evening classes, and the Harrington's event contracts brought her into rooms where the people she eventually intended to face across courtrooms were currently standing with champagne glasses, relaxed and unguarded, showing her exactly how power moved when it thought no one was watching. She was always watching. In 8 months of event work at the Harrington, she had learned which guests drank what, and at what rate, which couples argued quietly over salad courses, and which ones were genuinely at ease, which city officials became more candid after the second glass of wine, and which ones became more guarded. She had learned the rhythm of power in formal rooms, who people faced when they talked, whose attention they tracked across the room, whose arrival changed the temperature. She kept notes in her phone's voice memo app during breaks, brief and coded the way she'd learned to take notes from her father. Facts first, inference second, conclusion last. She had not told her colleagues at the Harrington about her father. She had not told them about law school. Before that, 14 years as a trial attorney with a record that had earned him 2 Bar Association awards and 1 federal citation for exceptional conduct in civil rights litigation. He was a man of measured speech and precise thinking, who had raised his daughter on the twin principles that the law was a tool that cut in both directions, and that the person who knew how to hold it properly was never at its mercy. He had bought Simone her first legal textbook when she was 12. She had read it twice by 14. By 17, she could identify procedural errors in televised trial coverage the way other teenagers identified clothing brands. She had not told her colleagues at the Harrington about her father. She had not told them about law school. She wore the white uniform, carried the trays, learned which guests drank what and at what rate, and observed, in 8 months of event work she had compiled, in her own private shorthand, more practical knowledge about how Carver City's establishment class behaved under the influence of open bars and mutual visibility than most journalists would gather in a decade. She found it useful. She found it clarifying. She found it, on the nights when the work was hard and the comments from certain guests landed with their small intended weights, something close to motivating. Captain Douglas Hale ran the Carver City Police Department's downtown precinct. He was 61 years old, 27 years on the force, the last 8 as precinct captain, a man who had accumulated authority in the way that institutional systems reward accumulation, through tenure, through connections, through the quiet compounding of deference from people who needed him. He was not corrupt in the dramatic sense. He had never taken a bribe that anyone could prove. He had simply spent 27 years operating inside a worldview that organized the social landscape into people who required his protection and people who required his supervision. And the organizing principle of that worldview was one he had never examined and never intended to. He had been invited to the Harrington Gala as a civic guest, the department's annual relationship event with the business community. He arrived at 6:30 in his dress uniform, accepted a sparkling water because he was technically still on duty, and spent the first hour working the room with the practiced ease of someone whose job was partly performance and who had been performing it long enough that it felt like personality. He knew most of the room: the mayor's chief of staff, the president of the Chamber of Commerce, a state senator and her husband, the Harrington's general manager, who shook Hale's hand with both of his and said how glad they were to have the department's presence at these events. Hale said the department was always glad to support the community. He had said this particular sentence approximately 400 times in his career, and it had never once felt like anything other than the right thing to say. He was on his second sparkling water when Simone passed his elbow with a tray of champagne flutes, and he registered her the way he registered the furniture, aware enough to step aside, not aware enough to see. That was 7:48 p.m. At 8:02 p.m., a woman named Patricia Graves approached him near the East Bar. She was wearing a white gown and the agitation of someone who had just noticed something missing. Her diamond bracelet, Cartier, 3 carats, a gift from her late husband, she told him, had been on her wrist at dinner and was now not. She had checked her chair, the tablecloth, her evening bag. Gone. Captain Hale set down his sparkling water with the decisive click of a man who has found a purpose for his evening. He interviewed Patricia briefly. She had not seen it taken. She had not felt it go. She had been seated at table 7, near the service corridor. The catering staff had been moving through that corridor all evening. Captain Hale looked toward the service corridor. The nearest catering staff member visible was a young black woman in a white uniform, moving between tables with a tray of water glasses. He nodded her position. He called it in to his duty sergeant at 8:07. A missing item, probable theft. He'd handle it personally. He walked toward the service corridor. He did not check the chair cushions at table 7 himself. He did not ask the event coordinator whether the bracelet might have been turned in to Lost and Found. He did not inquire with the other 4 catering staff members who had also been in the service corridor vicinity. He did not at any point consider that a bracelet could fall from a wrist without assistance. He found Simone restocking water glasses at table 11. He asked her, in the controlled, pleasant voice of a man performing competence for a room full of witnesses, whether she had taken anything from a guest this evening. She looked at him. No. He asked if she would consent to having her person and her station locker searched. I haven't taken anything, she said. So yes, search it. He said that he appreciated her cooperation and that he would need to detain her briefly for the department's records while the search was conducted. Standard procedure, he said, a word that does a great deal of work for people who use it correctly. You're going to handcuff me, Simone said. Not a question. She looked around the room, the 260 people, the champagne flutes catching the chandelier's light, the event photographer near the East Bar who had turned at the sound of his approach. She looked back at Hale. In front of all these people. It's standard procedure for a detention, he said, for a suspected theft at a catering event. Ma'am, I want to make sure I'm understanding the procedure correctly, Simone said. Her voice was completely level. The voice of someone taking a deposition. The voice of someone building a record. So the record is clear. Captain Hale heard the phrase, so the record is clear, and registered it the way people register something that slightly doesn't fit the situation, like a word in a foreign language that you almost recognize. He paused for half a second. Then he pressed her wrists together and the handcuffs clicked. The string quartet stopped. 260 people became an audience without intending to. Simone stood straight. She did not resist. She did not cry. She looked at a fixed point above the head of the nearest table. The way someone looks when they are deciding where to put something they cannot carry right now and will return to pick up later, with both hands and full attention. I'd like to make a phone call, she said. Once we're at the station, you haven't informed me I'm under arrest, she said. A detention allows me a phone call. That's the procedure. Captain Hale looked at her. The pleasant performance was showing its first fracture. 1 call, he said. She had the number memorized since she was 15. She made the call in 12 seconds. Said 4 sentences. Hung up. Looked back at the fixed point above the nearest table. What she had said, in 4 sentences, was this: location, situation, time, and please hurry. What the man on the other end said before he hung up was, I'm already on my way. He had not known what he was walking into. He had known only that his daughter had called him from an event at the Harrington at 8:36 p.m., with the particular tone in her voice that she reserved for situations requiring him. He had left his dinner and called the car and been 10 minutes away when his phone rang, and he had already been in the elevator when it opened at the third floor and he stepped into the grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel at 8:47 p.m. Justice William Adeyemi was 63 years old, 6'2", wearing a dark suit with the quiet authority of a man who had spent 30 years in courtrooms where the quality of silence mattered. He had gray at his temples and reading glasses he wore on a cord around his neck, and a stillness about him that Simone had spent her entire life trying to learn and had mostly succeeded at. He took in the room, in one practice sweep, the audience of 260 in their black ties and gowns, the string quartet frozen at their stands, the captain in dress uniform standing next to a young woman in white catering clothes whose wrists were bound in front of her body and whose chin was exactly level. His daughter, his face did not change. This was the most frightening thing about it. He crossed the ballroom in the silence that 260 people make when they stop breathing simultaneously. 15 steps, unhurried. The kind of walk that comes from 3 decades of entering rooms where the stakes were permanent and the performance of composure was the thing that determined outcomes. He stopped 3 feet from Captain Hale. He looked at the handcuffs again in the specific way that a man looks at evidence. "Captain," he said. Captain Hale stared at him. The pleasant performance had left his face entirely now, replaced by the expression of someone who has just understood that the ground beneath him was different from what he'd been standing on. He knew the face. Everyone in Carver City's civic society knew the face. He had been in this room with his face 30 minutes ago, working the circuit, exchanging pleasantries with city council members and Chamber of Commerce directors who deferred to it automatically. "Justice Adeyemi," he said. "This is my daughter," Justice Adeyemi said. He said it without inflection, which was somehow the most precise thing he could have said. A sound moved through the room. Not a gasp exactly. Something lower. The sound of 260 people recalibrating simultaneously. There was a reported theft. Was my daughter found in possession of stolen property? The search hasn't been conducted. Has anyone else been detained in connection with this report? Not yet. How many other catering staff members were in proximity to the area in question? Several. And you chose to handcuff my daughter. It was not a question. It arrived like a verdict. The syntax of a man who had delivered verdicts for 11 years, who understood that the placing of 2 words in sequence could accomplish what 20 sentences could not. Captain Hale looked at the handcuffs, then at the room, then at the face of Justice William Adeyemi, which had still not changed, and which communicated more in its stillness than most faces communicated in motion. He reached for the key. The handcuffs came off at 8:51 p.m. Simone Adeyemi rolled her wrists once. Slowly, she looked at her father. He looked at her. The communication between them was brief and complete. "The bracelet," said a voice from somewhere near table 7. Heads turned. A hotel staff member, one of the coat check attendants, a young man named Eddie who had been standing at the ballroom's perimeter, was walking toward the room with a diamond bracelet held carefully between his thumb and index finger. He had found it, he explained to the event coordinator who intercepted him, on the floor near the base of the service corridor curtain. It had apparently slipped off and gone under the curtain's hem. He'd been looking for the right moment to bring it forward. He'd been looking for the right moment for the past 22 minutes. Nobody had asked him. Patricia Graves made a sound of relief and took the bracelet and held it to her chest. She did not look at Simone Adeyemi. She looked at the bracelet. The room, which had been so still, began to unfreeze at its edges. Low voices, movement, the string quartet glancing at each other to see if this was the moment to resume. It was not yet the moment to resume. Captain Douglas Hale stood in the center of the grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel, in his dress uniform, before 260 members of Carver City's civic community, and looked at the floor the way a man looks at it when he is counting the cost of something he cannot return. Justice Adeyemi said, "I'd like your supervisor's name." He had known it for 11 years. He was asking so that Hale understood what the question meant. The formal complaint was filed at 9:15 a.m. the following Monday. Justice William Adeyemi filed it himself, not through an attorney, not through intermediary channels, but in person, at the Office of Professional Standards, where the duty officer had the particular experience of receiving a complaint from a state appellate justice who had once published a law review article on procedural accountability in police oversight systems, and was now describing, in unhurried and precise language, every decision Captain Hale had made in the grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel from 8:02 to 8:51 p.m. on a Saturday night. The complaint documented 3 specific failures: the absence of any search of the physical space before identifying a suspect, the detention of a single individual from a field of multiple equally proximate persons, and the application of restraints in a public setting without probable cause, without evidence, and without any inquiry to hotel staff who had been present in the area. It also documented, because Justice Adeyemi documented everything, the 43 seconds between the handcuffs being applied and the moment he had entered the room. The string quartet stopping. The 260 witnesses. The internal affairs review took 6 weeks. Captain Hale was placed on administrative desk duty for the duration. At the conclusion of the review, the department issued a formal finding of procedural violations in 2 of the 3 areas Justice Adeyemi had cited. A third finding, regarding the selection of the suspect, used language that was carefully worded but unambiguous to anyone who had spent time reading carefully worded, unambiguous institutional language, which Justice Adeyemi had for 30 years. Captain Hale was demoted. Not retired, not quietly transferred. Demoted from precinct captain to patrol supervisor, a reduction in rank that was public record and was reported, briefly but accurately, in the Carver City Courier's Municipal Affairs section on a Tuesday morning. He served the remainder of his career at the reduced rank and retired at 63. Whether the grand ballroom was a thing he thought about in those last 2 years, no, one could say. But the file existed, the finding was in it, the 43 seconds were in it, the 260 witnesses were in it. Files have a permanence that performance does not. Simone Adeyemi passed the bar exam 4 months later. She scored in the 91st percentile. Her father took her to dinner at a restaurant he had been taking her to since she was 8 years old. A small Senegalese place on the west side of Carver City, where the owner knew their names and always brought an extra order of thieboudienne without being asked. They sat across from each other with the ease of 2 people who have shared a language for a long time and don't need to speak every sentence of it. "How do you feel?" her father asked. "Like I've been building toward this for a long time," she said. "You have." The bar exam or the same wrists. She did not think about the handcuffs often. When she did, she thought about what she had decided to do with them. The way she had stored the weight of that moment and converted it into something with a shape and a use. She was not carrying it. She was building with it. "I want to do civil rights litigation," she said. I've known since I was 17. I know that too." Her father smiled, the quiet, specific smile of someone who was not surprised and had been waiting to hear the sentence anyway. "I'll make some calls." She joined a civil rights firm in Carver City 7 months later, a boutique practice with 4 attorneys and a 30-year track record in employment discrimination, housing, and police accountability cases. On her second week, her supervising attorney handed her a file and said, "Background research. Tell me what you see." The file was a police accountability case. Wrongful detention, insufficient cause, public setting. She read it in 90 minutes. She came back to her supervisor's office and stood in the doorway. "I see everything," she said. She went back to her desk and started writing. Every morning after that, she came in early. Before the other attorneys, before the assistants, before the coffee was made, she made the coffee. She sat in the quiet office with its legal volumes and its case files stacked in careful columns, and she worked with the focused patience of someone who had understood for a very long time that the law was a tool that cut in both directions, and that the person who knew how to hold it properly was never at its mercy. Her father had told her that when she was 12, she had been holding it ever since. Outside, Carver City moved through its mornings, the municipal buildings, the hotels, the civic organizations, the rooms where power arranged itself over champagne and string quartets, unaware or choosing not to be aware of who was watching. But someone was always watching. Someone was always in the room with a tray of water glasses and a bar exam 4 months away and a father's phone number memorized since she was 15, and a stillness that looked, to people who didn't know how to read it, like passivity. It was not passivity. It never had been. It was preparation, complete, patient,